just to refresh your memory, for those who have not heard me a few years ago, I should like to remind you that the Council for International Organization of Medical Sciences was founded in 1949 jointly by WHO and UNESCO and has its base here in Geneva. One of the main activities of CIOMS is medical ethics in the field of clinical trials and epidemiological study. But the other main activity, which takes most of the time of our Secretary General, is the domain of pharmacovigilance in all its aspects, from early signal detection to the medical dictionary for regulatory activities, MEDRA, and the working group on developing standardized MEDRA queries, SMQ, which are largely utilized throughout the world to find out possible side effects of a given compound, or given a given compound, what sort of side effect could enter into consideration. The second main activity, talking of medical ethics, CIOMS issue two main ethical guidelines. The first one is ethical guideline for clinical research involved in human research, which has been issued first in 1993 and revised in 2002 and is currently under revision. The other is the international guideline for epidemiological studies, which had first been issued in 1993 before the preceding one, and has been revised recently and in 2009. For my purpose today, I will limit myself to the most recent publication and examine the specific problem of clinical trials and epidemiological studies versus the protection of the right of the person. The problem of terminology, we have heard already a bit about it for the Declaration of Helsinki, is crucial to designate the participant in field action and research study. They can be human beings, inhabitants in census, citizens, participants, subjects, individuals, persons, cases, patients only if they are sick, and maybe that's also a vulnerable population, the sick person, victims counted as body if dead or simply missing. They may belong also to a group of persons, a whole population, an ethnic group, we have heard about it recently, just now, a class of the society, a type of disease or physiological condition, for example, pregnancy, an experimental or pharmacological study, a mixed group of victims of natural disaster, act of war or terrorism, or outbreak of disease, or even industrial intoxication. So it's a large group of people can enter into consideration. Yet, once the individual data are collected and submitted to statistical analysis, they are reduced to a single point, for example, around the Gaussian curve, as seen on this old German banknote in honor of the great mathematician. Statistics elaborated in the aftermath of severe epidemics and natural or man-made disaster have to take into account the number of identified personal burials and the body counts in mass graves which are often unidentified. There exists also in the field of epidemiology diverse schemes. For example, it can be descriptive, on the left, database, registries, biobanks, medical records. Or they can be of the analytical sort, cohort studies, case control studies, cross-sectional studies, or cluster sampling. Epidemiological studies are too often considered as harmless. Yet, if the risk in epidemiological study means the probability that an event, favorable or adverse, will occur within a defined time interval. In international study, the assessment of the type and probability of physical harms is not different from that in any experimental research and involving human beings. Therefore, undesired effects of any nature can also occur in interventional epidemiology, such as testing preventive measures, vaccination, modification of diet, prevention of occupational disease, or accident. Furthermore, in epidemiological research, even in non-interventional studies, one has to consider non-physical negative effect or wrongs, also termed harms to interest, such as violation of confidentiality to family, surroundings, employers, fellow workers, insurance company, etc. The invasion of privacy, late interview after an event, medical or not, that would rather not be recalled or revealed or brought to the mind of the person involved. And finally, stigmatization and discrimination. Hence, the absolute requirement, as in Guideline 2, for the validation of the project through the scrutiny of a competent ethics committee from both the scientific and ethical value of the project. This applies also, as in Guideline 24, to the use of stored biological samples and related data. A repository of all sorts of samples collected and stored with informed consent for long-term epidemiological study, for example, population biobanks, a repository of samples collected and stored in the context of specific research without explicit and fully informed consent, and a repository of specimen, typically surgically excised tissue, bioptic fragment, leftover blood collected for diagnostic purpose, collected and stored in the context of routine clinical care or pathological or even forensic examination. In all these cases, fully informed consent is required in Guideline 4. For all epidemiological research involving humans, the investigator must obtain the voluntary informed consent of the prospective subject, or in the case of individuals who is not capable of giving informed consent, the permission of a legally authorized representative in accordance with applicable law. Is the requirement for informed consent in such situation not excessive? Some people pretend it is. The answer is the following. The source of the biological sample might be identifiable since it carries the name of the person names or a unique identifier such as a social security number. It is linked to a personal medical record or accepts from it by a code or double code number. In all those cases, fully informed consent is required from the person from whom the sample has been obtained. Therefore, it is incumbent to ensure that the type of concealment of the personal information is adequate, and the investigator, as well as the collaborator or the sponsor in such case, responsible for the coding and holding the key of the match between the code number and the personal data are clearly identified. Finally, I wish to visit the concept of evidence-based medicine, to which it had been alluded yesterday. And I repeat part of the definition that was given by, I think, Dr. Donovan. According to the definition of David Sackett, it is the consensus, explicit, and judicious use of current best evidence in making decisions about the care of individual patients. Its goal is to assess the strength of the evidence of benefits or harms of treatment, including vaccination and preventive medicine. It is assessed based on several different sources: systematic review of randomized clinical trial, occupational health and observational studies, the two latter being relevant to epidemiology. And finally, meta-analysis of statistical analysis of the pool of selected data. Concerning the latter, meta-analysis has been increasingly used in scientific evaluation and efficacy and safety for benefit-risk assessment, as well as pricing and reimbursement of pharmacological products. Pooling available data from different studies is intended to increase the number of observations and thereby to improve the power to detect effect of interest. Meta-analysis can save time and resources and contribute positively to public health. Yet, the outcome of meta-analysis have both been debated and used as evidence with the regulatory process of medicinal products. Their interpretation, however, has been controversial with different regulatory actions. CIOMS assembled a working group last year to examine several problematic methodological issues that have been identified in meta-analysis. They are identification and selection bias for inclusion or exclusion, similarity or difference in various characteristics of the criteria for selection of the patient, problems relating to the standard of analysis and interpretation of results. And finally, the problem, a very big problem, with unpublished results of trial or data stored by private companies or regulatory sources which are not publicly available. In conclusion, one should keep in mind that not exclusively in private practice, but also in clinical trials and epidemiological study, due respect for the right of the person and of his or her privacy is essential. When approaching a potential candidate to participate in any kind of research, one should not only consider a subject fulfilling certain criteria of inclusion or exclusion, but an entire person with the physical, intellectual, and psychological life history. While dear participants to this conference, subject to the fatigue after 3 long days, or victim of sleepiness, I thank you for your patient attention.